Welcome to another episode of the Leadership Enigma. Listen, if you missed me last week, it's because I had a week off. I can't believe it. Out of 110 weeks, I took a week off, and guess what? The world did not end. So my apologies if you missed us. But we are back with a bang. I have the wonderful Donald Thompson. You do not want to miss this episode. I've been looking forward to this as I've been sunning myself. This is a gentleman with 20 years of experience of growing firms. He's on the Forbes list of the next 1,000. In fact, there are so many accolades. I'm actually going to let Donald tell you a little bit about that. And there's so much that I want to talk to Donald about. And I love the phrase that he gave me when we chatted a few weeks ago: loyalty, not retention. Because let's be honest, it's all about the people. Come back to me just after this.
You're listening to The Leadership Enigma, powered by Transform Performance International, a podcast for the insatiably curious to explore the power of human-centered leadership to create real momentum for positive and sustainable change. Whether you're an entrepreneur, business owner, or corporate executive, each week we speak to global experts, academics, rising stars, ambitious upstarts, and disruptors as we discover that success leaves clues. Now, here's your host, Adam Pacifico.
Well, it's a massive welcome to Donald Thompson to the Leadership Enigma. Donald, I can see you making notes already because you actually might be a candidate that falls into so many of those categories that were just explained in that introduction. But listen, you're an absolute gentleman. Thank you for coming on to the show.
I am really, really glad to be here. And you are absolutely right. When I was listening to your introduction, success leaves clues, right? And it's just exactly right. We all think there's some magic bullet we're looking for, but we interact with world-changing people every day if we just watch and listen and model. And so I love that intro.
Well, and I think I'm insatiably curious. The more I listen to that, I think if I had to describe myself in one word, my wife might use a different word, it would be curious. And I'm curious to hear a little bit about you because we spoke 2 or 3 weeks ago. You have such a rich background. You're doing incredible work. And I really was looking forward to this particular episode. So look, I gave a little bit of an intro about you, many years of growing firms on Forbes lists. I know you do board work. Your incredible focus is you're the co-founder of the diversity movement. But Donald, you tell us a little bit about your journey.
Fantastic. And I'll do it in a thumbnail, but I'll do it in a way that's impactful. And one of the things when I talk to leaders about who I am and what I do, I have that variety of career development over many years. So whether it's software technology sales, where I really cut my teeth in business, working with small companies, but selling to enterprise organizations. So I understood how the machine worked to actually get deals through, but how relationships matter no matter what the price tag of what you're selling. I transitioned then into the digital marketing space and invested in a small digital agency that we grew from a couple $100,000 in revenue to being a part of the Inc. 5000 2018, 2019, and 2020. And that I learned that your message, your brand, whether it's an individual brand or your corporate brand, has to be something that's growing and thriving and authentically connects to the people that you want to try to sell to. I've then transitioned to the diversity movement, which we'll talk a little bit about today, but that's really a culmination of a lot of things I've done in my career: executive coaching, board work with hospital systems and financial institutions. How do we make workplaces better, but link that to the bottom line, which drives corporate America? A lot of times, if you try to make something a social justice issue only, that has waning ebb and flow of people's attention. But if you link DEI to strategy, it will stay there for a long time.
And we're going to talk about that as well, aren't we? Because we spoke about the importance of DEI, but how do we link it to those tangible outcomes? Look, so many things as well are spiking my interest. You talk about relationships matter, which is when you and I first spoke. If I was found there was a long lost friend in you, Donald, when we first connected, right, 2 or 3 weeks ago. And I want to talk a little bit about relationships mattering, but I'm curious already. How would you describe yourself now with all of your rich background and the work you're doing now? Are you the entrepreneur? Are you the business leader? Are you the DEI expert? I mean, it's a combination, but is there something that's standing out for you right now?
Yeah, when you describe yourself as insatiably curious, I aligned with that. The way I would describe myself is a competitive learner. I love the process of becoming better each day. And I look back over a decade, over 2 decades, over 3 decades of business, and I'm so much stronger as a business leader than I was, but I've worked at it. I've paid attention to the things that I wasn't strong to try to make them a part of my toolkit, if you will. And then I gave myself space to embrace the things that I was really good at and focused on how to make a career out of those. So one of the things that I would say to describe me, Donald Thompson, is a competitive learner. And I can learn from somebody that's sweeping the floor in the office or somebody that's in the C-suite. There's something to learn from everybody we connect with.
Well, there's something that also comes out there, because there was a phrase that I think you've used on your website that, again, we chatted about. That was hustle and humility. And you just said there that you're capable of learning from anyone, whether it's the CEO or whether it's the person who's sweeping the floor. That's humility, but it's also respecting the person, not just seeing the job title or the role, but seeing the human being, which, as I say that's become so important in a post-pandemic environment. And I've said this to people: see the person, not the job title or the role. And I think that's why you and I almost became kindred spirits when we first chatted. Tell me a little bit about when you discovered you were the competitive learner, because I remember, when we're younger, we're really trying to be that individual contributor. We're trying to find a space and add value. And sometimes we just don't know what we don't know.
That's exactly right. One of the things about me is I'm the son of a football coach. And I'll talk about American football, since we're talking.
I was going to ask the question.
Yeah. So we're talking with a global audience, but American football is something that is through the fabric of my family. And being the son of a coach, you're always getting taught about how to do it better. Do it again, right? Was a phrase I would hear ringing in my ear anytime I would work with my dad on fundamentals. Do it again, because you can't create perfection one step at a time. It is 1,000 of the same steps until you get it perfect. And so I learned that as an athlete. And then what I figured out very quickly is, if you were going to do something at a high degree of success, you had to do it as a team. If you were going to have sustained success as an individual, you had to have coaches that could see the weaknesses and strengths in you that you could never see in yourself while you're in the game, in the competition. So those learnings early in my career as an individual translated, and here's the thing I'll share, to my first job in technology sales with Grant Willard, my mentor, with a small little software company called iCubed, where I didn't have and do not possess a college degree, do not have a specific pedigree that many people do, but Grant saw that competitive learner, that hustle, that humility, and was willing to teach me and grow me. And so I learned a complete industry from the ground up, because I was willing to be humble, I was willing to hustle, and I was willing to be that competitive learner.
So it's amazing that there was someone who saw you and saw the ability in you and gave you that opportunity. Do you think in some ways that's left a really big mark for you, because you're passionate about people, relationships, and seeing the human being and offering opportunity? Did that help shape your approach?
It absolutely did, Adam, and thanks for asking that. And let me tell you specifically why. I look for the good first in anyone I'm talking with, whether it's a negotiation, whether we agree or disagree on a particular topic we're discussing. If I can find that commonality, if I can find that goodness, if I can get a hard charging business executive that I'm in a financial conversation with to tell me about their kids and their family and where they volunteer, it humanizes one another together. And now we can have a powerful conversation about the business at hand, because now we're talking to one another as individuals that represent particular businesses, not business representatives that everyone has to win every conversation. And so that is something that I strive for in each relationship that I build.
And it's really seeing the individual, isn't it, as opposed to the cookie cutter approach. And we're very quick, aren't we, at putting each other in boxes. So that kind of leads me. I need to go into, obviously, you co-founded and you're the CEO of the diversity movement, and the work that you're doing, DEI, in working America. Because let's be honest, not all is well in the world. This isn't just a USA or even a UK thing. Not all is well. So how do you reconcile the passion that you have to see the individual, to see the good, to see the human being? And let's be honest, there are things that are just deeply wrong in society, and you're doing incredible work in that arena too. How does one reconcile? Or maybe it's impossible to reconcile, but how do you kind of live with those two positions?
Yeah, so we are both fully aware that corporate America is a profit-driven society,
Uh-huh.
enterprise, right? Organism, whatever way you want to describe it. So then it's very important to link diversity, equity, inclusion to drivers that already exist, because that's a language that people can understand. So if I talk about diversity, equity, inclusion as the right thing to do, some people will get on board, but not the majority. If I talk about diversity, equity, inclusion to increase innovation, if I talk about a corporation that has 8% higher win rate in multi-million-dollar sales because they have a diverse set of individuals on their sales team, those type of impact numbers get business leaders to think about diversity in conjunction with growing a powerful brand, growing a powerful business. My experience has allowed me in sales, in marketing, in leadership to look at diversity, equity, inclusion as, yes, a powerful conversation, but more importantly, in many cases, a powerful business driver that, when linked with the board work, the C-level work, excuse me, gives us the ability to make it stand the test of time versus being a fad for discourse for the moment.
And that fad element is something that's really important to mitigate, isn't it? Because then we get peaks and troughs. And there are many instances across the world. And I know the US, and I spoke to Lisa Hurley post George Floyd. And so it was about how to take incidents in order to create a compelling reason for change as opposed to a fad. Does that make sense, Donald, in how I'm?
No, it absolutely does.
Otherwise, we get peaks and troughs all the time.
That's exactly right. And I want to come back to an earlier thing that you described. America is the point of view that I see the world through, right? Unfortunately, we all have a point of view that we see the world. And there's a lot that's broken in our discourse, in our dialogue. If I look out and say the sky is blue, there's 50% of the people say, what shade of blue? Is that really blue? What is the definition of blue, right? We would not be able to create commonality because there's so much that creates antagonism against one another. But back to your point, diversity, equity, inclusion really is a fundamental construct of human decency. And if we talk about human decency first, if we talk about the ways in which each of us are motivated by the work that we do, the contribution we deliver, the belonging we feel at work, we can build to a more complex conversation by keeping things really simple. And I'll give a quick example when I'm talking with an executive, for example, that may not understand DEI. Right. I'll ask them if they have children. I'll ask them if they have a wife or a partner. And most of the time, the answer is yes. Is there someone of other gender, of other race that they know that they care about? And I said, would you want your daughters to be paid less than your son for doing the same work? And invariably, that protection mechanism of that middle-aged white man comes to the forefront, and he says, of course not. Would you want more people to attach to your brand to grow your market share? Absolutely not. So would you mind tweaking your marketing so the language in your communication hits more people effectively? Well, sure, Donald, that makes sense. And so because I use examples that link to the business frame, the personal frame, and not the attack frame, we're able to move conversations forward faster.
Now, there's two things I want to pick up on. One of them is you just said something which is going to really resonate with me and stick out for me. And you said actually DEI was actually a construct of human decency. I've not heard it said like that before. And I love that because that really just does what it says on the tin. Then comes the other aspect of joining the dots between the business outcomes. What are some of the business outcomes that you're seeing from organizations who embrace DEI as part of their DNA, and I'm using your language now, Donald, as opposed to a compliance process that one must go through? What are some of the results people are seeing?
Yeah, so some of the results, quite frankly, are the expansion in candidates, right, with varied backgrounds. And you can't change your optics of your organization until you change the pool of candidates, number one. The second thing that's most important is the level of engagement, which you can measure within your organization, right? You can do surveys and pulse surveys, and you can really do listening tours and take down the incidents and actions within your organization. The third thing, and this is super critical because you don't necessarily think about it with DEI, is the increase in impact of mentorship, career planning, and sponsorship programs within organizations. We've heard the phrase over the years that people don't quit organizations, they leave managers. If managers are more involved in the mentoring part of management, not just the management part, what you get is a tie between people because you're helping them grow their career in specific ways. I'll be really tangible here. I was talking with a research analyst, And they were working with a firm that by changing the way they did reviews, increased by 200% the number of people of color in their high performance category. Here's what they did. Instead of just having performance reviews, in the beginning of every annual review, they started the dialogue with a career mapping conversation. By reestablishing what the goals of the employee, what they wanted from the business, what they wanted to shoot for and attain. Now you've got someone thinking about their future, and now you can link the gaps in performance to that future goal that that employee wants. And they had much better, more powerful conversations. So those are some metrics, but also some real tangible, small nuggets of knowledge that we're seeing and working with clients at the diversity movement.
And that's why I love doing this podcast, because as you say, these are tangible nuggets that someone listening can actually put into action themselves. So I'm hoping there are lots of people listening who are leaders of people, leading organizations, small, medium, large, it matters not. If they're listening and they're thinking, this is something that we've been considering, battling with, we're still working on DEI, what is really your best advice for a leader? Because sometimes it can feel overwhelming to make this right. How do they start as they mean to go on? Get them started.
How does that leader get started? I'm going to give something for the leader and then something for the leader to think about for their organization. So for the leader, one thing that we can all start almost immediately is our inclusive language. Right. How do we show up in our communication? How do we change our language from you guys, which is common in the States, to everyone, everybody? How do we think about our feedback that we deliver to our team? A lot of people talk about the sandwich method, which I don't subscribe to. Say something good, say something to improve, say something good, right? Yeah. Well, everyone's read that book, right? So it comes across as inauthentic. What people want and what leaders can do around DEI is when you give feedback of a standard that needs to be met, what are the things you can do with those folks you're leading to help them get there? What resources you're going to use to help them support? So it's both the feedback and the supporting coaching mechanism in real time that makes that feedback land in a powerful and authentic way, even if the feedback is not amazing, even if it's something that needs to occur. So language and then changing the way that you give feedback within your organization. How do you look within the business as a leader? Number one, set reasonable goals. You don't have to do everything all at once, no matter what the cry of the crowd. It's really understanding what your culture is ready for from a DEI standpoint. And here's the big thing I see people doing wrong today. They're rushing out and hiring a chief diversity officer without the infrastructure for that person to succeed. Take a moment and listen to your organization through your data, through your HR team, through your managers. And what you can do as a leader is lead by example in setting measurable goals for your organization, but not trying to handle everything at once, because that leads to false promises.
And this brings me back to one of my favorite subjects, which I think we spoke about. It's that role of the role model. So it's the leader, even if a small or medium organization, living those values of inclusivity. As you say, rather than reaching out immediately saying, I'm going to have a chief diversity officer, which is important. Interesting, as you said, if the infrastructure is not there, this might not work. There's a disconnect. And we also spoke, didn't we, about the human-centered leader? Because I know when we first chatted, you talked about empathy, curiosity, and your focus on what I would call innate human-centered leadership capabilities. Tell me a little bit about kind of your approach, your mantra, but how important those capabilities are for any leader above and beyond their technical competence or brilliance, whatever they've studied and whatever they've learned over the last 30 years. What's your view on the requirement and need now for those capabilities, empathy, curiosity, humility?
One of the things that I'm really fortunate is that through my executive coaching practice, I work with a lot of leaders, billion-dollar organizations that are struggling, not with their ability to deliver bottom line results, but they're struggling with the new expectation of that empathetic leader that's been kind of thrust on them as a new skill set and requirement that wasn't there before in the same way it shows up today.
Right.
And so that anytime we think about learning a new dance step, right, we look awkward and silly even before we look graceful, right, and fluid. And so leaders are really hung up right now with saying the wrong thing, even if their intentions right, are good relative to diversity, relative to equity, relative to inclusion.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I help leaders show up, and I've had to learn myself, right, is don't let perfection get in the way of progress, number one. And number two, we can learn a tremendous amount by expanding our network within our own organizations. What I mean by that is leaders by default are somewhat isolated based on the data that they hear when you're listening to the same folks. I encourage leaders just to change the groups of people that they're getting information, because it will increase their insight at a low cost, at a quick turn, and in a way that they can understand and process. And then the final thing that I encourage leaders to do is do your homework. There are a lot of great resources out there around diversity, equity, inclusion. You can go to thediversitymovement.com. You don't have to buy a thing. We have free resources for leaders on the ROI of DEI, how to build out a DEI program. What are the best practices when you're looking at building your DEI team? We do this because the employees in our team are mission focused as much as we are monetization focused. And so we want to leave no one behind in this journey. So it's very content rich in the free section of our website, with videos, with information for leaders with psychological safety to be able to learn in this DEI construct.
Again, so much rich stuff coming out there. I'm actually chatting to a psychologist in a couple of weeks specifically about psychological safety and the new psychological safety index. So I'm looking forward to that episode. You talked about free resources. So let's just pause. Can you give that URL address again, Donald? Because, people are listening to this and thinking, hang on, I can go there and help myself. So help us again.
Absolutely. Thediversitymovement.com.
Simple as that.
And as simple as that, and just click on the button resources. And we have over 30 webinars in our recent stack that are there 100% free on various topics around DEI. We have white papers on inclusive language, what I talked about with leaders, so that they can get that better understanding of how to alter their language to pull people towards them versus against them. We have construct on a leadership calendar around DEI events. Again, our goal as an organization, like me as an individual, there's plenty of times to talk about the commercial aspect, but let's be helpful. And if we're helpful, the other things take care of themselves.
That's absolutely great as a resource. So I'm grateful to you. So let me move on to something which may actually become the title of this particular episode, and that's loyalty, not retention. A bit of a leadership zeitgeist at the moment, the great attrition, or is it the great retention, or is it the great escape, as Gary Ridge described it as well when I chatted to him. But I really like this when you and I chatted, you said, no, hang on, loyalty over retention. Tell us a little bit about that.
Thank you so much for space to talk about this. This is something that I've been thinking about for the last few years, as I've really looked at growing organizations, whether in my board role or as a CEO.
Yeah.
And loyalty is an active relationship building infrastructure. Loyalty is something that you think about of a friend, of a partner, of your parents, of your family. And loyalty creates an environment where if my team sees that I'm doing something that's landing incorrectly, and they're loyal to me and the organization, they have to speak up, because loyalty is different than checking the box on your work characteristics. Loyalty means if you get a job offer from another organization, that you're going to talk with me as your manager about the why of which you're seeking another opportunity. Create that opportunity for us to counteroffer. But loyalty is different than retention, because you can retain someone in a chair. Loyalty means that they won't stay with the business if they can't give their absolute best. Loyalty is a source of powerful feedback and learning. And let me talk about, just for a minute, how do you cultivate that? And it really is one conversation at a time. It is how we take feedback as leaders from our team. It is that powerful word of someone doing something well and remembering not only to say thank you for your hard work, but thank you for your hard work on the multi-million-dollar presentation that we won as a team. I want to let you know that you were not forgotten, even though you were not a part of the presentation. It is being very specific in our feedback, very specific in our praise, and then also, and this is critical in building loyalty, is how do we look out for the personal and professional goals of our team members as a part of how we lead. And those are the things, those are the elements that I think are important in building loyalty. And were done for me by many of the leaders that I've worked with over the years and that I respect tremendously.
I'm tying this in with so many amazing conversations that I've had. When I spoke to John Amici, he spoke about leadership being energy expensive. And it is energy expensive to really dial into being aware and connecting with the people that you lead. Professor Tony O'Driscoll from Duke, I think you're in North Carolina, aren't you, Donald? So Tony's at Duke Fuqua and said that meaning is the new money. And when we think about retention, you can throw $10,000 maybe at someone who will keep them in the chair, but that's not loyalty, is it?
No, it isn't. That's table stakes. That keeps you on par with your competition.
And is it kicking the can down the road? Because it's just gonna come again in 6 months' time.
That's exactly right. It is something that is subtly different but highly impactful.
Right.
And loyalty, when you're building an audience like you have with your podcast, your audience expects you to deliver a certain level of competency, creativity, and power in the guests that you choose, in the knowledge that they gain, that brings people back. It's not different with our employees. How do they feel when they leave, when they shut down the computer? Are they excited to come back? And we can create that energy as leaders, but it is intentional. It has to be something that we think about fostering and growing on a daily basis. And to quote the phrase I just learned and wrote down, leadership is energy expensive, but we've got to be willing to pay the expense to gain the outcome that we want in the new economy.
But if you like that quote, also, I can recommend John's book, The Promises of Giants. And anyone listening, John's done a couple of episodes with us already, and I interviewed him for my book. So he's got a great voice within this space and within leadership. You also used a phrase when we chatted a few weeks ago about points of care. Tell me a little bit more about that, because again, that resonates with me. But how do you use that in the way that you lead and the way that you coach and mentor?
So I'll talk about a new hire without dropping names, but we hired a new DE&I advisor with our company.
Right.
And one of the things on bringing them on board is we had a specific start date in mind, but they had some personal things that they wanted to work on and work through, and they talked about it with us. And so we created an alignment where they started with our firm part-time, they will go to 75% and then 100%, so that they can be fully engaged every moment that they spend with us, points of care. We had another team member that we adore. We absolutely adore this individual. And they actually handed us a resignation letter because they didn't realize that moving to part-time was an option.
Right.
They thought they had to leave the business because their world changed personally. And we said, wait a minute. What is the reason for this conversation? They described some of the things they were working on in their personal life, and we crafted an arrangement where we can retain this individual, but that they can do some of the things outside of the office that are really deeply personal to their family. So that intertwines with the points of care and loyalty, because you can have those real conversations and you can create that personalized work experience that people crave these days. And you have to create and foster and model that as a leader, but employees also have to give their leaders an opportunity to do so. We can't read minds, but if given the opportunity, we have to respond and react with those points of care. Those are a couple of examples that I've seen in my business over the last 30, 60, 90 days.
And let me ask a question, which I'm not going to ask actually that much more because it's pandemic related, is have you seen an increase in certain ways of working during the pandemic? And what I mean by that, an inability to do something or an ability to do something, or has this become even more important because of the experience that we went through almost as a world?
Yeah, the pandemic has touched us all, and in many ways that are positive. People are looking at more meaning in work, not just money, but also things that are really, really challenging, right? Dealing with things as simple as childcare, right? Dealing with the number. I was talking with an executive, a female executive that I partner with, Fortune 100 company, and we were talking about the numbers of women decreasing in the workforce as a result of the pandemic, and how some of the strides that women professionals have made over the years have actually gone backwards as a result of the pandemic. And it's because that home care is still dominantly, right, created in one sector of our society. And so there are lots of different ways of working, but I will tell you that we are struggling to adjust to the hybrid model without having proximity bias.
Yeah.
I, as a leader, enjoy seeing people in person.
Oh, me too.
So how do I manage the proximity bias for some of our leaders that are in the Houston, Texas area to make sure that they feel included, that I buzz them on Zoom or Slack to make sure that we have a impromptu 5-minute cup of coffee. And so to your question, the world of work is changing dramatically. And as leaders, we're struggling with it. But if we pay attention and are inclusive in how we work, how we ask for feedback, manage our own proximity bias and different things, we can get there.
So I'm hearing that leaders have actually got to be intentional, which some may have thought about that before. And I know, again, when we chatted a few weeks ago, you said that we've got to slow down, take stock. Tell me a little bit more about what you meant by that. Why do we need to slow down? Did the pandemic provide us the opportunity to slow down, or did it not?
One of the things that it provided the opportunity for us to slow down in terms of we were not in motion to too many different geographies.
Right.
People were not traveling as much. You weren't traveling to the office and different things. But the anxiety level, right, went through the roof because it was an unknown set of experiences that no one knew how to grapple with. So that slowing down actually gave us more time to worry. Quite frankly, it gave us more time to figure out some things that were divisive against us. And what I will say is, coming out of the pandemic, we're not there yet, but we're moving back to some semblance of normalcy. The thing that I think is a real positive is that organizations are more open-minded than ever about what a personalized work experience can be for their individual employees. I think that's a good thing. I think it's a good thing coming out of the pandemic that leaders are reevaluating, even if they're walking on eggshells a little bit, even if we're struggling with how to get there, leaders are thinking through how to make alterations to their leadership style to be more effective in this new environment. These learning strides, these learning opportunities are very valuable, and I'm proud of the many leaders that are trying to do better each and every day.
And I know you're forever learning as well. And is there a real standout change that you feel has happened to you, or something that you feel you've learned over the last few years that's really front of mind for you? Because with all of the experiences that you've got, is there something you're thinking, I have really learned or changed because of? I don't know. Is there something?
I have it, Adam. I have it top of mind, my friend. And it is really the way that I deliver feedback.
Right.
One of my failings, one of my weaknesses is I thought that being direct and candid, right, cut to the chase, right, was being honest and being helpful. And what I've really slowed down to understand is what is the best way to deliver information based on the individual, based on the audience, based on the context of which I'm speaking. I work on it every day.
Tailored.
I still, as my default personality is quick, candid, decisive. But sometimes that's the wrong thing to do, because you don't know the reasons why someone might not have met a standard or needs a little help. And a lot of times, if you know the why behind it, it will change the way you approach the conversation.
Well, there comes the curiosity as well. Forgive me, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Donald, but there comes that curiosity as well, doesn't it? I mean, singing off the same hymn sheet, which is why I knew I was going to love this particular episode. I love all the episodes, but I love this episode too. Now, as a fellow author, you're about to release a book, Underestimated, I believe, aren't you? Tell us a little bit about that.
And thank you again for that space. So Underestimated, the journey of a CEO. And one of the things that I've had to work through and work on in my journey as a business leader is, what are all the things in my life that brought me to this moment?
Right.
So I'll tell you a really quick story. In the 1930s, my great grandfather, Samuel Thompson, had a newspaper that he used to sell, and it talked about better treatment of blacks in Bogalusa, Louisiana, which is deep, deep south.
Wow. In the 1930s.
In the 1930s.
Wow.
And the Ku Klux Klan and members of the community intimidated him to stop the selling of this paper. He wouldn't do it. And he worked at a paper mill. And on one day going into work, he never came home from work because he was pushed into a paper chopping machine, and murdered. And it wasn't until many, many years later, a deathbed confession of one of the men involved, it fully came to light what happened. But people in my family in the Black community knew. And so those are some of the things and the seeds of racism throughout my family lineage that has made me humble and appreciative that I stand on the shoulders of giants in the work that I'm able to do, but also the ability to make my story align with others in a purely positive way. That openness, that humility, that drive, that love for America, even if America doesn't love someone that looks like me back all the time. And so Underestimated is about that journey, but it intertwines some of the business experience and how I've navigated corporate America in a positive way.
Wow, that's an incredible story. And thank you very much for sharing that. But I also have that question of how do you find that positivity in a story like that? And a positivity, as you just said, that sometimes corporate America does not thank a person of color as opposed to what they see as a stereotype. How do you still take positivity from that and say, regardless, I'm going to be a force for good? How?
One, Adam, I've got to be completely authentic and transparent here. It's not easy all the time.
Yeah, I bet.
I went through 20 years in my sales career without selling to someone that looked like me.
Wow.
And the first time I was in that moment of having a business conversation with an executive that looked like me, I had to step out of the room for a minute and go to the bathroom and shed a tear or two. I was in shock of that moment. How do I keep it positive? Because I have a responsibility to make the way better. And that's whether it's someone that has African-American heritage like I do, whether that is for my daughter who is a part of the LGBTQ community, whether that is someone that has a disability. I have decided as a part of my life work, not just to be an ally, not just to be an advocate, but to be a champion. And to me, being a champion means that you are in the arena trying to make the change that you are describing every single day with everything you've got. And so that's the way I keep positive, is because my goal is so much bigger than me. And it's really the impetus of why we created the diversity movement. And we wanted to productize the DEI journey because so many people have gone through typical DEI training XYZ. We wanted to create a set of micro videos that are 2 to 3 minutes that people can watch in their downtime. We wanted to create a digital FAQ that corporations could put behind their firewall. We wanted to create an environment where the DEI leader of one within the organization has the support tools so that they can scale a DEI program at a practical budget that small businesses, large businesses, and startups can all afford. And I appreciate the space to answer that question.
Wow. Well, you, my friend, are indeed an example of a force for good. And that's why it also reminds me, I feel very humbled as well that I get amazing people to come on this podcast, which is why I do it. And I hope it's why people listen to it as well. And in that vein, how can people get in touch with you, Donald, to continue the conversation, get your help, bring you into some of the challenges that they're working on? Best way.
The best way is LinkedIn is phenomenal, right? Okay. I'm a big user of that platform. I love that even over the years as it's grown, it has stayed for the business professional by and large, and a business conversation can be had there. And then you can also go directly to the diversity movement, hit the info box, and I'm there. But in a personal one-on-one interaction, I love the LinkedIn platform.
Donald, you've been an absolute superstar. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on to the Leadership Enigma. I hope this has been good for you too.
This has been amazing, and the nuggets that I've got from you, but also the guests that you had on your program, I'm going to go back and listen. And so with nothing else, you now have another fan, another listener, another set of downloads. I'm excited to learn from what you're doing.
You are a superstar. Thank you very much indeed. I appreciate it.
Join us again next week for more tips and strategies on the Leadership Enigma. We'd love to hear your comments on today's show, as well as suggestions for future topics and guests. Get in touch with your host on LinkedIn or visit the dedicated website, www.leadersenigma.com, powered by Transform Performance International, where you can access our exclusive learning, including books, videos, bonus content, assessments, and more. Please don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe on all your major podcast platforms. Thanks for listening.